the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas's Educator Summer Professional Development. Hi, I'm Allison Clark, Exhibit Specialist at the Dallas Fed. For those who have joined our PD programs in the past summers, we welcome you back virtually. For those that are joining for the first time, welcome. Teachers truly are the heart of Texas and our economy, and we are excited to support you by providing video sessions from our expert economists, economic education advisors, and external speakers in our summer series. Thank you for choosing to join us for your summer PD. We know you have many choices, and we are glad you are here with us today. Whether you pre-registered or not, you will have the opportunity to earn continuing professional education credit after watching the video and completing the survey. The summer series will be available for CPE credit from June 22nd through August 15th. Our summer series topics include COVID-19 and the economy, which features our own expert economists. You will also hear from our regional economists with economic updates from Houston, El Paso, San Antonio, and Dallas. Lastly, you will also hear from our economic education advisors and external speakers on classroom resources and strategies that will expand your instructional toolkit for the upcoming year. The agenda for this session is on the slide. Remember, once you have finished the video, you will need to complete a survey and reflection questions to receive credit for the training. You can only receive credit once for each course. Today, you will hear from our presenter. At the end of the video, you will also be provided a link to complete an online survey and answer a few reflection questions. The survey should take around 5 minutes to complete. The survey is password protected. The password will be available at the end of the video. After you have submitted your survey, please allow up to 2 weeks to receive that certificate via email. Although we can't meet in person this year, we are here to provide you support for any questions you might have. Please feel free to reach out to anyone on our economic education team. Our contact information is available at the end of the video and on our website.
Today you will hear from Keith Phillips, Assistant Vice President of the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, San Antonio branch. Phillips' areas of concentration include regional economics and economic forecasting. Research papers in economics, which tracks publications in economics, ranks Phillips in the top 5% of economists across the world in terms of the number of distinct publications. Over the past 16 years, he has been the most accurate forecaster for Texas job growth in the Western Blue Chip economic forecasts. He obtained his PhD in economics from Southern Methodist University and holds a bachelor's and master's in economics and a bachelor's of journalism degree in news and editorial from the University of Missouri at Columbia.
It's a pleasure to do this today for teachers in our district, and in particular teachers in the, I'm assuming in the San Antonio region. If you are a teacher in the San Antonio area, hopefully we've met before at other programs. But if not, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a regional economist from the Dallas Fed, and I've been there at the Dallas Fed for now 37 years. And so this is something that, of course, I've never been through. And so I think we're all students right now learning how this pandemic is impacting the economy, how unprecedented public support from the federal government and local governments have going to impact how we recover from this downturn. And then there's uncertainty surrounding if the pandemic will get worse as we go forward, as the spread increases. So right away, I'll just let you know there's a lot of uncertainty, but we're all trying to figure it out together, how it's going to impact people and how it's going to impact the economy overall. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Texas economy. There are certain kind of industry makeup and ability to work from home, things like that, that we looked at initially to try to determine how Texas might be impacted by this pandemic. As you can see here in this slide, we do have some data so far, and that's through May, and this is we saw sharp declines, significant declines in jobs in March and severe declines in April as the economy shut down to try to reduce the spread of this very dangerous virus. But we did just get recently, last week, we got May data for Texas. The U.S. data for May surprised almost every forecaster. And of course, we knew the U.S. increase, so it didn't surprise us after we saw the U.S. data. But before the U.S. data came out, I was expecting, and as a department in Dallas, we're expecting jobs to continue to decline in May. But you can see here there was a broad-based, somewhat of a mild rebound compared to the losses in May, but it was broad-based across states. And you can see Texas was slightly faster than the U.S. in terms of job growth in May. But I think it's more important and more insightful to look at the overall change in jobs from before the pandemic in February till May. And we're going to do that in a second. But first, we'll look across industries here, and you can see that the rebound or the slight recovery we saw in May was broad-based, with much of the rebound coming from sectors that got hit the hardest, and in particular leisure and hospitality, which rebounded sharply. These are non-annualized rates of growth, so they're just 25% rebound in 1 month is huge. Of course, the decline was huge. And in the next slides, we'll see that we're still way down from where we started. But, so we know that particular restaurants started to hire back. So eating and drinking places, bars and restaurants are in leisure and hospitality, and they started reopening up in May. You can see the rebound there. The exceptions to the rule in the recovery in May was the oil and gas sector. The oil and gas sector in Texas and the U.S., but it's centered in Texas, particularly out in the Permian Basin. You can see it continued to decline. It's going to be a very tough year for the energy sector in the state. And typically Texas does better than the nation, and we're really not expecting that, although we may come in close to the nation. And partly it's because the oil and gas sector will continue to be a drag on the state in the second half of the year, while kind of other industries affected by COVID will continue to improve. Another sector that did not pick up in May was the government sector. Here, you might notice that Texas are the blue bars and U.S. are red. And government has been hit by declines in tax revenues. One of the things first hit in San Antonio was the tourism jobs that the city has to promote San Antonio that comes directly from hotel-motel taxes. And as you know, hotels got hit very hard. And so tax revenues, hotel-motel taxes fell almost, close to zero. And that really created a significant financial problem for these parts of the city government that promote tourism. But also sales taxes are important, and sales taxes have got hit hard. So the government sector, in particularly city governments and county governments, have been hit hard. Now, fortunately, school districts get their money primarily from property taxes, and property taxes have not been hit in the same way. But overall, you see other industries coming back at least somewhat in May. So this is a more broader view of what's been happening in terms of Texas and the nation and across states in terms of jobs. This is basically the pandemic losses, even after accounting for some positive growth in May. And you can see, once again, these are non-annualized rates of growth. So it's a very significant decline in jobs through May. Although Texas is below the national average, we were not expecting that because Texas has a slightly greater share of employment in industries that were directly hit. And as I show a little later, Texas has slightly fewer percent of jobs that can work from home. Now, the oil and gas sector also created negative, but generally there's somewhat of a lag between decline in oil prices and the decline in energy jobs. And that's because often drilling is on a contract, on average 6-month contract. So that usually results in, some of them only have a 1 month, 2 month, 3 month, out to 6 months. On average, they have 3 months. So generally a big decline and persistent decline in oil prices affects job growth with about a 3-month lag. But anyway, nonetheless, we thought Texas would be close to the national average or somewhat weaker. And so far, the good news is that we're not. But I'll have to say there's revisions are likely to be larger than normal to both job growth in the establishment survey and household employment. And why is that? Well, job growth, this is from the establishment survey, which generally includes about 40% of all jobs. The problem is to get that higher percentage, they oversample large firms. And this hit has really occurred in small firms. Obviously, they're capturing a lot of the job losses, but I think there's when the broader data gets in, which is called the quarterly census of employment and wages, we'll get that in the second half of the year, and we'll use that to revise this data. It'll include much more data for small firms. And those small firms are going to be impacting this data a lot. So we may see this change later in the year as we get revised data. What we do know is this thing has hit all states, and it hit all states hard. Kind of what states got hit hardest, these rankings will change when data gets revised. But so far, Texas looks, at least relative to the national average, hit not as hard. And it could be because, the virus didn't hit us as hard. You can see New York. Everyone knows New York got hit very hard by the virus, and it's way over there on the left. And so, some of this is playing in here too. So we'll see what shakes out when the data gets revised with the broader data set. But right now, Texas is looking. It's hard to say looking good when you have job declines of close to 15%. But anyway, it's relative to the national average. We're not hit as hard with the data so far. And you can look across industries, and here Texas once again is the blue one, and the U.S. are the red bars. And you can see that across industries, Texas seems to have been hit less hard than the national average. You can see the very, very strong job losses in the leisure and hospitality sector. Other services down there are the second hardest hit, and they include personal services such as barbershops and household cleaning services and things like that, which are high contact, personal contact industries. So they got hit very hard too. Financial activity is one of the least hit industries. And that helps San Antonio with the USAA and Frost Bank. We have a pretty substantial financial sector here, but as I'll talk later, leisure and hospitality is much larger than the state and national average here, as you probably already know. But anyway, once again, Texas is hit very hard, but not as hard as the national average in most industries. So job growth, we look pretty good relative to the national average or job declines. Here, when you look at the unemployment rate, which comes from a different survey, the household survey, along with some modeling of this with claims data and other data, you see that the unemployment rate in Texas in May was quite close to the national average. They both spiked to very high rates, much higher than the unemployment rate was in the Great Recession. But in May, the unemployment rate in the U.S. was 13.3 and in Texas 13.0. So once again, it's not like a normal recession where things get bad and they kind of build up for a while until, prices drop and interest rates drop and people start taking risk and the economy starts to recover. This was basically a shutdown of the economy. So you can see this huge increase and then just right away. So it's not really like a recession. It's more like a hurricane. It's more like a natural disaster hit because that just stops the economy all at once. And that's why these models we use to predict things, we don't know what kind of model to use. Our standard models assumes this kind of gradual worsening and then gradual improvement. And so we have lags of the dependent variable we call in the model that suggests momentum in the economy. And there's no momentum here. It's just the economy falls off a cliff. And you have to model it a whole different way. And you don't know what business cycle dynamics are going to play out or not play out. I wasn't around in 1918 for the Spanish flu or whatever that was. So anyway, but you can see this it's kind of like, looks like what happened in Louisiana after Hurricane Katrina hit. You see this huge, immediate increase in the unemployment rate. But Texas, once again, close to the national average. We have these surveys we do for our businesses, both in terms of manufacturing and service sector. The service sector one is the blue line. Anything above zero means there's growth, that services are growing. The red line is our manufacturing outlook survey. That's the manufacturing sector. You can notice here, during the Great Recession, obviously they both declined. During 2015 and 16, the service sector continued to grow, but manufacturing had some declines. And that's when oil and gas sector, oil prices dropped sharply and oil and gas fell. And so manufacturing was pulled down somewhat by the energy sector. Our manufacturers produce a lot of equipment for the oil and gas sector and was weakened. But you can see since then it's been very strong all the way up to the pandemic hit. Although manufacturing had weakened somewhat as global trade wars, you remember those last year, weakened the manufacturing sector. But overall, we started the year off strong, and then the pandemic hit. Saw this big decline, consistent with the data we have now for March and April, worse off, a harder hit than the Great Recession. But then in May, we saw this bounce back, at least to less negative growth. Now, it's interesting that this doesn't show positive growth in May like the employment data did. Even we have things about employment, and we have an employment index for both of these, and they both also showed less negative than April, but not positive. And it may be suffering even more from maybe large sample bias. A lot of the declines that occurred were in restaurants and bars and places that are very small, maybe having a handful of employees, and retailers with maybe a handful of employees. And we just don't survey those people a lot. So, and once again, all this stuff is subject to revision, so we'll find out. But it showed improvement, but not positive growth. And so we'll see what happens in June. Our June survey is coming up. We get that around. We'll be publishing that in the last week of June. But overall, we see weakness everywhere, consistent weakness, followed by some improvement in May. This is a chart that we look at every day at the Dallas Fed, and it shows various things. This top line here is daily new cases of COVID, and you can see that we bent the curve back in early April. It had been rising sharply up until early April, and we started shutting down the economy, and it flattened out, and we stopped the increase in daily new cases, which was really important. And you can see the yellow or orange line here is daily deaths, it also followed. It follows about 2 weeks later after the new cases kind of topped off and started declining a little. Deaths peaked a little bit later and then began to look like it was going to decline, but then kind of flattened out. And despite reopenings of the economy, we were able to manage that. It's not like new cases and deaths were really falling, but flattened out. And it looked like we were making progress. But unfortunately, if you look at the data since late May, after Labor Day, Labor Day was kind of a turning point. Not Labor Day, Memorial Day, sorry. Memorial Day was kind of a turning point here. And you can see there's an uptick in new cases. At first, we were kind of consoled a little bit by the fact that deaths hadn't begun to increase. But once again, there's about a 2-week lag, and now we're seeing daily new deaths increase. So this is very much a concern. I have a couple other measures on here. This red line is the number of hourly employees working at small firms that use this software. It's a free software, at least the basic part of it. It's for timekeeping called Homebase, and they've shared the data with us, not for individual firms, but this is for firms, a big sample of firms in Texas, and this is staffing levels, and you can see it kind of bottomed out. And so once again, this is small restaurants and retailers primarily, and other services. And you can see it bottomed out in early to mid April and began to rise. So it's consistent with the employment beginning to pick up. And this little notched area after Memorial Day is just because we had an extra day off in the week, that Monday. But you can see overall the pattern is continuing to grow, but then it begins to top out. And if you look over the last week, it's actually beginning to fall slightly. And I think restaurants are, because of the increase in cases, restaurants may be not adding as much. And I have some data on restaurant reservations that suggests that people may be not are backing off or restraining themselves from going to restaurants again because of this increased spread. And we know from our contacts that some restaurants have had to actually close due to employees getting COVID. So we're really concerned about this new spread, and it seems to be affecting, it's likely that, when I look at this and other data, I think probably June employment's going to increase again, but not significant. We're not going to see a significant bounce back or catch up in June. It's going to kind of maybe even weaken from May as the spread of COVID begins again. And this blue line down here is the mobility engagement index. And it's showing, this is how people travel outside their home and move around, and if they stay out long, if they move to areas of work or to restaurants and retail. It's a combination of those things. It's based on cell phone data. And you can see that mobility fell a large degree between mid-March and mid-April, but then mobility's increased again as people are returning back to work, going out shopping, going to the beach, other things. But it looks like it's beginning to slow somewhat too as these cases have increased. So this is the daily restaurant data we have from Open Table. So these are reservations at restaurants that take reservations. And you can see that the bottom darkest blue line here is the U.S. And these are the large metros. And you can see San Antonio is a green line. You can see that restaurant reservations have picked up more in Texas than the national average as people began to go back to restaurants. Now, this isn't fast food. This is restaurants that take reservations. But even if you call in and don't use Open Table to these restaurants, or you walk in to get a reservation, they enter it into the system, and it's included in this data. But you can see about a week ago, most of these reservations began to decline somewhat in the Texas metro areas. And that's right when this COVID thing started picking up again. So once again, that's kind of, that's natural as people become concerned about catching this virus. So once again, this is a warning sign maybe that we really need to watch out what's going on. A second wave of this will cause problems for the economy. Now, right now, hospital utilization rates are still pretty good. The hospitals are not over swamped with cases yet, but if it keeps growing like this and hospitalizations keep growing like this, sometime between the end of July and end of August, we could see in certain metro areas in the state, we're hitting up at the capacity constraints with hospital beds and ventilators. So we're certainly concerned about that. So if you look at San Antonio, I got to speed up here a little bit, but if you look at San Antonio, one of the studies, Yishin Su had a blog on the Dallas Fed website looking at occupational requirements and how many of those occupations are located in certain areas. And you can see based on what you can do. So occupations that you look at emails a lot, you can easily work from home. Occupations that require physical activity, you can't work from home. Those are some very minor examples, but he pulls all these characteristics of occupations to determine who can work from home and who can't. And you can see Texas was slightly below the national average of the fraction of workers who can work remotely. And then down here at the bottom, you can see that it varies by MSA, San Antonio being one of the smallest of the large MSAs in terms of the fraction that can work from home. So that suggested to me San Antonio might be hit unemployment claim. But overall, data suggests so far San Antonio has not been hit as hard. Job growth has not declined as much, and our unemployment rate has not risen as much. And it could be because we've managed to control the spread of the disease more than other areas, at least up till recently. And maybe that's why we have not been hit as hard. So here you can see San Antonio job growth from February to May is about 8% in San Antonio. And higher in the other metro areas. Austin being the highest at 10%. Although Austin is more technically, I would guess the digital divide is not as great in Austin as it is in San Antonio. But so they have more claims and suggest a higher unemployment rate, but it may or may not be the case. So anyway, San Antonio has had a significant job loss, but not as much as other areas. You can see it's been broad-based across industries. Once again, this is May, from February to May. Leisure and hospitality, 28% of all jobs are still gone from leisure and hospitality, even after the May improvement. But it's been broad-based. Other services hit hard. Mining is a very small share of jobs, but it's been hit hard. And health has been hit hard, which is a big sector here because of dentist offices were closed and elective surgeries were put on hold. So the unemployment rate in San Antonio is a little bit less than the state or the nation. We're at 11.8% as of May. I'm running out of time. Let me see what time we got here, 26 minutes. So you can see total claims in Bexar County has not been, total claims for unemployment insurance, which is consistent with a lower unemployment rate, have not been as high here. overall since the pandemic started. Once again, it could be because we don't have people that can file online as easily as many people and have to call on the phone to get in through, and they've been having difficulty there. But once again, if you watch the news in San Antonio, you've seen that the number of new cases has been accelerating in San Antonio. Here's hospitalizations. You can see this blue line going way up in San Antonio. And there's about a 14-day lag between hospitalizations and deaths. So you can take this orange line and kind of project it upwards. Suggests that we're going to see a growing number of fatalities. And fatalities will shut down the economy. Besides being really bad in and of themselves, when people understand and realize their neighbors, friends, and relatives are getting sick and some of them dying, that's going to really cause people to really worry about going out and transacting business. Mobility, this is once again a mobility index, how people moving around. In San Antonio declined less, maybe because we had less of a problem. We're still more mobile. People are moving around more than the state average. But anyway, mobility has declined less. It's less right now. So let's look at the outlook for the economy. The U.S. and Texas leading index have declined sharply and then bounced back a little bit in May, suggesting some recovery coming up, but still weak in the second half. And this is what we're projecting overall, is that job growth will be down about 3.2%. During 2009, the worst of the Great Recession, job growth in the state declined by about 3.5%. And so overall, it's going to be a bad year, although we'll see improvement, much better job situation in the second half of the year. The unemployment rate will fall to about 8.9%, and that's worse than the Great Recession. It never got that high during the Great Recession. I think it got up to about 8.3%. During the Great Recession. So unemployment rate is going to continue to fall, but in the year at a very high rate. So in summary, the pandemic is unprecedented. It has many aspects of a natural disaster versus a typical recession. Activity is slowly recovering and is likely to continue to recover in the second half, although it may be somewhat sawtooth at first with kind of slow and then fast. But it's all going to depend on the spread of the virus. If the virus keeps accelerating new cases and deaths, we're going to see much slower recovery in the second half than we expect right now. We're likely to end the year close to the national average despite a prolonged weakness in the energy sector. The virus, at least so far, hasn't hit us as hard as many other areas of the country, even though we have a slightly higher share of jobs in the sectors that were hit. San Antonio is a large tourism sector, and a smaller share of workers can work from home, which made me think we're going to get hit harder. But so far, it doesn't look that way, and it may be because the virus didn't hit this area as hard. But we'll see. Data is going to be subject to a lot of revision, and all this can change somewhat. But we do know every place has been hit hard, and hopefully we'll see a continued rebound in the second half. But I'm very concerned about the growth and the spread of the virus right now. Thank you.
Hello, I hope you enjoyed the presentation on the regional economy. If you would like additional information, I'd like to show you where you can get resources from the Dallas Fed. So begin with going to our website, dallasfed.org, and then go to Research Texas. The page you will land on will look like this. And on this page, you're going to find links to a lot of critical real-time data about the Texas economy. One of the things that you may enjoy is our Southwest Economy podcast. This is available on this website, as well as you have the ability to read a quarterly newsletter. In addition, there are presentations that are updated on the Texas economy, and this is where you'll find our employment forecast for the state of Texas. Lots of publications available. Some of them are listed here. The Southwest Economy, a quarterly publication with in-depth articles and interviews about Texas and the surrounding area. The Beige Book, which is available before each of our Federal Open Market Committee meetings and talks about the key indicators and drivers of the economy in the 11th District. At the Heart of Texas, which talks about industry clusters, and then our agricultural survey. For those of you in the classroom doing 7th grade history or current events on Texas, this is a great book that talks about the key metropolitan areas in the state of Texas and the economic drivers of those particular regions. And then finally, if you go to Federal Reserve website and go to the education resources, you'll find some classroom-ready presentations. And under social studies-related topics, you'll find a presentation that discusses the economic drivers of Texas. I hope you have a great summer. It's been a pleasure having you join us today. Thank you, and take care.
Thank you for joining our virtual PD session. Please use the link and survey password at the end of the video to complete a brief survey and reflection questions. In order to receive CPE credit, you will need to submit the survey after watching the video, which will arrive via email. Please allow up to 2 weeks to receive your CPE certificate. We look forward to hosting you at one of our 4 locations next year and continuing to support you with our virtual programs in the meantime. If you have any questions about today's presentation, please feel free to contact anyone on our economic education team. Thank you for joining us this summer.